So I just got done sanding the first frame, and I hope you can agree that that looks a lot better than what it started out as. Here's the one I just sanded. Nice and smooth. Looks really good. Looks almost new, to be honest. And then you got this one here. It's yet to be sanded, and you know, it's rough, splinters, and so yeah. Go ahead and sand that one next. Okay, so there we go. The frame's been sanded down. They're nice and clean. No rough edges on them, no splinters. Everything looks good. And I gotta say, these cleaned up pretty nice. But now, gonna head back down to the workshop and go ahead and look into getting a tabletop on this. And I do apologize for the crappy lighting, but you know, this is an unfinished garage and that's what you gotta deal with. Alright, so we're back in the workshop again, and what I've done is reassemble the table, put the bolts back in, and I gotta say, I like how this looks. It really cleaned up nicely, it's nice and smooth, there's no splinters, definitely an improvement compared to what I started with. But unfortunately, what I have to do now is head back out to the garage again, because I need to source a piece of plywood for the tabletop. And I do know there's probably some wondering why I just didn't go out and buy new material for this table project. And that's because over the course of the years, all the displays I've built them on a budget using only materials that I have laying around. And occasionally I would go out and buy things, but it's a lot cheaper to use what you have on hand versus going out and, depending on what kind of table you want, spending upwards of almost $100, if not more, on lumber. Like this table here, I've had pretty much everything on hand and cost me $0. The only thing I've had to go out and purchase is the bolts to secure the two halves, and that set me back maybe about $10, if even that. But it's definitely a lot cheaper than going out and buying everything new. So, like I said, I'm going to head out to the garage next and source a piece of plywood for the tabletop. Right, so back in the garage again, I've got a couple pieces of plywood here behind all this garbage. And these are left over from a cabinet project I was doing. Never used them, but I'm thinking this is a 4x8 piece of plywood. I think this will work. I just need to get it out of there and cut it to size. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is cut this piece of plywood to the size I need for my tabletop, which is 4 foot by 5 foot 4 inches. Now normally I'd go with something like 4 foot by 5 foot, but since the frames were 4 inches larger than what I needed, I decided to leave them alone, and besides that gives me a little more room on the tabletop anyways. So I'll go ahead and measure this out. Mark it 5 foot 4 inches. And come over here to the other side and do the same. This plywood's kind of got a bit of a warp to it from where it was sitting, but it'll straighten itself out when it's screwed down to the tabletop. Alright, there's my mark. I'll just cut this piece off here, and I'll use that for another project down the road. Set this back where I got it. So I got my tabletop down here to the workshop. The next step is going to be to go ahead and put it on my framework here and see if I've done everything right. It should fit perfectly. If not, well, that's the whole measure twice, cut once issue. Actually, that looks pretty good. Have to line it up a little better, but yeah, I don't think that looks too bad, personally. So there's a look at the tabletop, just roughly positioned over the frame. Doesn't look that great at the moment because the plywood's warped, but get a couple screws in there and it'll hold it down just fine. Well, that's all the screws in, and the tabletop is secured to the framework, and gotta say I'm happy with that. But the next step is going to be to go ahead and start laying out my plans for the display, and I do have a little rough idea of what I want. My plan is I'm going to have a setup with a truck down over the embankment, and then I'm going to have my rotators there basically pulling it up out. And to do that, I'm going to have to elevate the back of the display here, and I'm going to have an interstate with a westbound lane and an eastbound lane. And then down here, I'm debating if I'm going to have one field or multiple fields here, but I know I at least want one field because the truck's going to be laying down, and I think I'll have maybe a cornfield there. Not 100% sure yet, still in the planning stage with this. Rough idea, but over here is unknown. I'm not sure if I'm going to have this road here or if I'm just going to have like a little goat path back to, say, an abandoned shed and falling down barn or what have you. I don't know. This is yet to be decided, but I'm going to have a train track here, a road here. There will be a little entry to the field or fields here, and then right here I'm going to have two bridges which will run over the roadway and the train tracks. So this is just a rough idea of what I want. It may change as I continue with the project. You know, once you get started, sometimes you tend to take on a different course. Alright, so here's a rough idea of what I'm aiming for. And I mean, I got my elevation in the background. I'm going to be using this styrofoam to do my embankments and such. And over here is where I'm going to have my rotators and my wrecked truck set up at. It's going to be down in the field right here. And then over here is going to be the rail line, which will run here, and then a road here. I'm thinking my measurements on here may be a little bit off, because my measurement said 54 inches over this way for the rail line, but that's, I mean, that just seems to make this field too big, so I might have to change some stuff around. Another thing is I'm definitely going to have to do some work here, because as it stands now, that bit of elevation is not enough to put a bridge in and get trains underneath it. So I mean, there's still a bit of work to be done, but some of this is basically I'm making things up as I go along. But we'll go ahead and continue on with this project in the next part, because I feel this part's drug out long enough. So I'll see you in a bit.